Welcome to episode number 10 of the Dugout Report. I am here with Geoff Pontes from Prospects Live. And
I'm from Baseball America, man.
From Baseball America. And we will be diving into how the draft will be like for the Major League Baseball. And welcome back. And I'm excited to have you on.
Thanks a lot, man. Yeah, excited to be on with you here and chat a little bit about the upcoming draft. Just a few weeks away now.
So my first question is, what are your thoughts on Tennessee's reliever Ben Joyce?
Sure. Yeah. Really, really interesting arm. I think he sort of has the stigma of having been mostly a college reliever, and I think when we look overall, a lot of those guys haven't necessarily had a lot of success, primary college relievers in the pro ranks. We look at some of these guys in recent years, guys like a Durbin Feltman for the Red Sox was a guy I think a lot of people were pretty high on, thought would move pretty quickly. And he struggled, throughout his professional career. There's been, cases of several others over the last couple of years. Guys that just, it hasn't clicked, it hasn't materialized necessarily. And I think, not being a starter in college and then sort of, starting and then converting to relief, for whatever reason, those guys, those primary relief guys that are relievers in college and then relievers in pro ball, it never seems to work at the hit rate that you would anticipate. So, I think for someone like Joyce, what he's up against is sort of just the stigma within the industry of that sort of archetype. And we'll see. I mean, he did have a start at one point this year. He obviously has insane stuff, not just the fastball and the velocity, obviously, up to 105 miles per hour, sits 100 easily. He's got a really good slider as well. The problem is he doesn't necessarily throw the slider or the fastball that frequently for strikes necessarily. So it's one of those things where, do you think you can take this player that's really sort of raw in terms of who he is as a pitcher and, mold him into something that can really leverage that sort of talent and unusual characteristics that he has. So he's definitely an unusual case. It's a very risky profile and player for a team, which is why, I don't think he's going to go, certainly not in the first round. I don't think in the second round either. I think he's probably more of like a third round guy, maybe late second. And it could even be later, just because there's other players, college players that maybe just don't have the notoriety because they don't throw 105 miles per hour, but frankly have been better pitchers and prospects and players for 2 to 3 years. And I think that, that's sort of what the question mark is. So a team could fall in love with them. That's what the draft is all about. There's no set consensus regardless of what the rankings are out there. You'll find several evaluators and scouts, depending on who you talk to, cross-checkers, high-level decision makers that have very differing opinions from what might be out there in the public space, because they just know more. They're around the players. They're having negotiations, these conversations. And I think that, there's just only so much that we can possibly know. So, and we all have our own biases, et cetera. So, I think with Joyce, he's a really interesting player, a really fun player to follow as he enters, pro ball, because of all the things that he can do. Somebody you definitely want to go out and get to the minor league park and and see once he's in pro ball. But, I think overall as a prospect, there's definitely some major question marks just based on who he is as a player.
What are your thoughts on Drew Jones and Elijah Green?
Yeah, two really, really exciting young players. Drew Jones, obviously has the bloodlines of, his father being, 5-time All-Star, 10-time Gold Glove winner, Andrew Jones, a Braves great. I don't think that's, any hyperbole either. um, and he has some of the same characteristics as his father. He's a tremendous athlete. He's a double plus center fielder, probably one of the best defensive center fielders in the class, if not the best. He's got a great arm, just like his dad, can run. There's power there. There's power projection. There's field to hit. He's 6'4", but he's only 180 pounds. If you've seen any video of him, seen pictures of him, he's very thin. And he's twitchy and strong and sort of wiry or whatever. But he's a guy that's probably going to add, his man muscles at some point, and when he's 25, 26, going to look very different physically than he looks now. And I don't think that's in a bad way. I think he's going to be the kind of player that probably adds good weight, good muscle, good strength. So he's very projectable with some real right now skills. Elijah Green is sort of already built like a major leaguer. He's 6'3", he's 214, 215 pounds, very strong, broad shouldered. He runs really well. He's a double plus runner right now, plus runner. He's got double plus game power. He's played against really high level competition. Now his father isn't a borderline Hall of Famer, but his dad was a 10-year NFL veteran. As a tight end, a very athletic position. Physically strong. So he has pro sports bloodlines as well. So I think when you look at the package, these are both players that are just extremely talented, and have some high level right now tools, and also have, and I think this is something like you look with like Jack Leiter or someone like that, or maybe Vladimir Guerrero Jr. or Bo Bichette. When you have a professional athlete as a father, and you have that around that, I think that you have a greater understanding of what the transition is, the spotlight, locker room culture. Just I think some of those things, you can get advice from your dad that you or I, if we were these tremendous athletes, couldn't get that, right? So I think there's some similarities between the two players. That just physically, one player is much more projectable, where the other is very much a right now body, and right now power. Where I think Jones, though you've seen some home run videos, it's not like Elijah has that sort of double plus raw now, where it's more like with Jones, you're like, all right, I can see there being above average, so maybe plus power at peak, but he's going to be a very good, well-rounded player. Where maybe you think Elijah Green slows down a little bit, it ends up in right field long term. But I don't think that's a knock necessarily. But when you're looking at the profile between the two and comparing, contrasting, I think that's one of the things you might see there. But they're both really tremendous players. And if I was a fan of a team, and my team got either of these players, I would be really excited for the future, and there would definitely be two talents that I would be following with a close eye, over the next few years as they matriculate to the major leagues.
What do you see the Phillies doing with the first 4 picks in the draft?
I think that there's a good chance that the Phillies end up going after some of the more maybe established college players that are in the draft. They're going to be available there. It wouldn't shock me if maybe it was like a Drew Gilbert, or maybe a Zach Neto is there. Some of these positional players, and then maybe even some pitchers. Like I don't know if they're on Rocker or not, but Kumar Rocker looked really good for me when I saw him a few weeks ago. But I think that there's a lot of players sort of in the mix there, sort of from like outside of the top 10 or even like top 8 in this draft, where depending upon what the team likes, it could shake out a lot of different ways. But I think they're gonna. I wouldn't be shocked if they target someone who's a little bit more stable with that first pick. And then in the rounds after, I think they did a good job of targeting pitching over the last few years. They hit a home run with Griff McGarry. Ben Brown has looked really, really good as well. And of course, McAble and Andrew Painter fell into their laps. I don't know if they go for a prep arm again, if it were to happen. I mean, there's a chance that Dylan Lesko, who's injured but was one of the top players in that class on the prep side in terms of pitching, maybe they take a shot there. I don't know. And sort of have a three-headed monster of like the top prep arm in the class at one point or another, between Painter and Abel and then Lesko. That would be really interesting if that happened. But I don't think they're going to go for a prep hitter necessarily, at least from what I've heard. So I would wonder if maybe some of the college bats are in play at first, and then the second, third, fourth round. I think you're looking for probably some more pitching depth, because that's really the name of the game. So if those picks and those players are available, it really wouldn't shock me if you see them go after maybe two, maybe three college players in rounds like 2 through 4 or 5.
So if the Phillies do select a high school player, how long do you think it'll take him to get the big league start?
Which player did you say? Sorry, I missed it.
Like any high school
Oh
prospect?
yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the player, right? There's some
Yeah.
guys a little bit more polished, but we've seen on average for a high school pitcher, it's typically 5 to 6 years before they're a viable major league pitcher, and whether that's in a relief role, but especially a starting role, it takes years, and that would mean that they're about 23, 24, which I think we would both agree that's a young starting pitcher in the major leagues. And it takes time to sort of maybe get your first taste and take your lumps. I think we see that happen a lot. Good Kyle Wright, even as a college guy, it took him a few years to sort of really sort of gel and become a real major league starter, a mid-rotation or better guy, which is what I think everyone's sort of targeting in these first few rounds. So, and then when you look at the position side, unless you're, an all-world talent, one of the best players, prospects in the minor leagues, and you make it to the majors at 21, most of the time, those guys are typically maybe 22, 23. So maybe it's a little bit shorter if they're a good player, talent. So fourth, fifth year, maybe they're there and playing every day. Just because, these guys are coming from playing high school to then having to play against guys who sometimes are on these, even in the complex that might be right out of the draft, that are experienced college hitters if they're pitchers they're facing, or vice versa. And those guys have 3 years of high level experience, sometimes 4 if they're especially nowadays after 2020. So I think any anticipation beyond 4 or 5 years for a lot of these guys is probably a little too optimistic. So that's sort of where the number I think typically lies.
I did some research earlier today, and I saw a mock draft and saw Braden Barrera from American Heritage High School with the possibility landing spot for Philadelphia. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think that would sort of fall in line with what they've done over the last couple of drafts of targeting, a high level prep, high profile prep arm. This time would be a left-hander. He's a little bit undersized, which I think is different from what they've seen, but he does have big stuff. He's got feel for spin, so I think when you're talking about somebody that sort of falls in line with Painter and Abel in terms of loud stuff, and that's kind of unusual, in terms of finding those guys. So I think that's one of the strengths. So Barrera could definitely be a potential name that they could go after. If they avoided Porter or liked him more than Porter or an injured Lesko. But I think he would definitely be, sort of in play at that point. We've seen the fastball up to 98, 99 at certain points this spring. And, the slider low to mid 80s. He's got stuff, he's got power behind it. it's just a matter of, once again, these prep arms, it takes a little bit longer, more often than not, for them to fully gel. The success of Andrew Painter early isn't necessarily the norm. So I think just have the expectations set. But Barrera wouldn't be an outlandish pick, certainly, where they're picking in the first round.
Uh, how about Pittsburgh and Oakland? And what do you think about their draft picks in this year's draft?
Yeah, I think that Pittsburgh is certainly one, and I think in recent drafts has done fairly well in terms of who they've targeted and the success that they've sort of had. I like a lot of their prospects in their system. I actually got to watch Henry Davis, the first overall pick last year, recently, and the bat is great. But they're picking at 4, and I think that they have an opportunity there to maybe get another college catcher in Kevin Parada, or Brooks Lee, maybe Elijah Green is there, maybe Tamar Johnson is another top player. Maybe they like Tam Collier. There's a lot of names that are potentially in play. A lot of good college hitters, a lot of bats in general. So I think based on where they're picking, they're probably going to take a hitter, and there's probably a pretty good chance that they take a college hitter there at 4. So it's just a matter of who they like and who's willing to take what money, and where, because they're going to pick highly in the next round, and they might be able to pull a player down from the back end of the first round to their second pick. So, I think that could certainly be interesting, and see what happens. You just got to see what happens with that organization and that team. And the other team that you had asked me about was
Oakland,
right, at 19. Yeah. Well, I think they're in full rebuild mode. So, if there were maybe a top high school talent that falls to them, or someone like maybe the Robbie Snelling, left-handed pitcher with really good stuff out of high school in Nevada, maybe they like him. They tend to chase players who are incredibly athletic, whether that's pitchers or hitters. And they're sort of in full rebuild mode and looking to add the best available players, in their minor league system, and sort of stock the cupboard again. So we'll see. I don't think they'll necessarily go college guy. They can probably take some more risk there in the first round. I know they went Max Muncy last year, but high school, shortstop Max Muncy, and that's paid off so far. Muncy's been pretty good. I would be interested to see, if they did go maybe one of these college starters that got injured and dropped a little bit in the draft. Maybe they're a fan of Tidwell or Landon Sims, or even like Connor Prelip, who's back throwing again. So there's several options there. Maybe Dylan Lesko, another name I mentioned earlier, falls to them. So I think there's a lot of options. They're kind of a wild card. They could go a lot of different directions. And the thing is, they're picking 19 this year. I think we can both safely bet they're going to be picking a lot higher in the first rounds, more than likely in 2023.
What do you think about like how many high school prospects we'll be taking in the first 3 rounds?
Yeah, I think because of the NIL deals and just the nature of the draft, and we still are kind of feeling the after effects of the 2020 shutdown, and a lot of guys, the 5-round draft, and a lot of guys going back to school. So some of the players from college have skewed a little older. I think, some of these senior signs, or COVID juniors, are maybe not as don't get knocked as much, or viewed as negatively as they had been in previous years. When you were a 4-year college player, you had a lot less leverage, even if you had a really good season. So I think we're seeing some of those guys like Ivan Melendez, etc. So what it's done is a lot of the top high school players, I think, are going and signing, and you're seeing them go in. But it also gives like this middle tier with the NIL deals, where these guys could go to an ACC school, or a lesser Power 5, and then potentially, as we saw with Tommy White, famous freshman this year with NC State, he's got a 1 free transfer year, and he's got NIL money that's coming to him, and he can go and make that jump to LSU. So I think that they have a little bit more leverage now than they did previously, but it's also, some of the top high school guys will probably get taken early in the first round. I think we'll see some sporadically in the second with a lot more college players. And then I think it'll be really, really college heavy later. And we won't see some of those bonus dumps later in the, after round 10, like we used to see in, 2019 and prior to that during the bonus pool era.
Do you have any Division III players on your mind of getting drafted?
I'm not super up on Division III guys. So not really. There's nobody like in particular. I know that there's Ryan McCarty, from Pennsylvania, Abington, right? If I'm not mistaken, Penn State Abington. I saw him last week. He's a guy that I think, maybe goes round like 17 to 20, maybe signs as an NDFA, a non-drafted free agent. But I do think that he's somebody that's going to be playing professional baseball in August after seeing him on the Cape. So he's out here now playing against a bunch of Division I players, mostly some top JUCO guys. So I guess, he's the one Division III player that I am familiar with and have seen recently. I can't 100% guarantee that he is going to get drafted, but I think that there's an opportunity there potentially for him to go.
It's going to be a very fun time once the draft day comes around. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on to talk MLB draft content, and definitely we'll have you back on maybe after the draft someday, or towards the start of spring training or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Thanks for having me on.
Yep, thank you.